Meet Aliyu Mustafa. He's one of Nigeria's foremost political analysts and also runs the Kairos Leadership Institute, which works directly to empower Nigerian youths. Nigeria's youth make up over 2/3 of Nigeria's current population. The youth are predicted to be a tipping point in the upcoming election. As such, Aliyu Mustafa is uniquely positioned to understand the pulse of the youth. Accordingly, he will be discussing Nigeria's upcoming 2023 presidential election. In order to interview him, I flew all the way to Abuja, Nigeria. I'm your host, Ebube Okoli. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell notification icon so that you will be alerted every time new content becomes available. Mustafa, it's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Yeah, nice to have you up here, Obwe.
It's great to be here with you in Abuja.
Thank you very much.
So can you briefly tell me where you were born and what brought you to the capital of Nigeria?
Well, I was born in 1981 in the Kaduna State, and I came to Abuja in 1994 to start my primary education, secondary education, and then after my secondary education, I moved back to Zaria, where I studied in Ahmadu Bello University, and I graduated from Department of Sociology. I'm also an alumni of the State's Department Alumni Exchange Programs.
So Aliyu, a lot has been said that you work with the youth and youth empowerment. What exactly does youth empowerment mean?
Well, I spent the whole life working to empower people. Back at the State Department where I work in the American Embassy, we did a lot of exchange programs that empower youths from education to cultural exchanges, entrepreneurship, and what have you. I also work with Kairos Leadership Institute, where for us, youth empowerment means a paradigm shift from job seeking to job creation for the Nigerian youth. And we try to capture them young, right on campus, giving them relevance and alternative to this job-dominated mindset. And so that's what we do at Kairos.
Now you spoke about the Kairos Leadership Institute. What exactly is that?
Well, Kairos Leadership Institute was founded by Professor Emeka Okoli. He's a Nigerian-American Fulbrighter and a senior citizen. He came back sometimes in 2006, 2007. He created the Leadership Institute in order to give young people a platform to develop their skills, to hone their talents, and be job providers instead of job seekers. The US government sponsored the Pioneer program, and ever since then we have continued to fund it on our own. And so that's what we do at Kairos, and Professor Emeka Okoli is the president, and I am the national coordinator, and we've been doing a whole lot of things.
All right, so one of the situations when we talk about the youth is that there's almost a disconnect because the youth are heavily active on social media, and that's usually where they give out their political leanings and thoughts and organize themselves. However, there's a disconnect because that doesn't seem to translate over to the polls. And so now, for example, the big deal right now is the upcoming elections, the presidential elections to be specific. And it seems like in a country where 80% of the population is under the age of 43, we don't really see anybody from the youth stepping up to be a champion of the youth. What exactly needs to happen, and how does that need to happen for the youth to actually take their place, being that they make up so much of the population?
Well, I'm an advocate of the use of social media for social good, but there is no polling unit on social media. People have to get involved. You have to get registered to vote, because if If you refuse to register to vote because you think it has been made difficult, then you're actioning someone else's plan. So you have to start, politics will have to start from the grassroots. Youth will have to get involved from the ward level to the local government, to the state, up to the federal level.
So when we talk about the youth, recently we witnessed the End SARS movement, which was the youth organizing themselves through Twitter, using Bitcoin to finance it, using Twitter to organize it, and different things like that. And so it seems like the End SARS movement was just an expression of frustrated youths wanting to take their destiny into their own hands, not really knowing how. What are your thoughts on the movement, and what are your thoughts on ways it can be more constructive to actually make the change that the youths it seems are wanting to make?
Yeah, all over the world, people are complaining about police brutality. And for instance, in the US, we had the Black Lives Matter came up after the death of George Floyd. And here in Nigeria, the youth also got tired of the police brutality, the extortion, and all of it. But in my own opinion, both the police and the youths are all victims of failure of governance. When the police are not provided with what they really need to do their job, they can't do their job very well. Of course, they have to charge the people to pay for their services. But either ways, it doesn't make it right. And we want to see a situation whereby the government will empower the police, empower the young people, and fix everything that comes from the failure of governance. It's one of the things we have to get right if we want to be like the developed countries that we copy from.
All right, so now when we talk about terms, once again, youth empowerment to an extent is a vague term. And it's really rare that people outside of maybe on social media or different forums actually talk about how to empower the youth. Many people simply state that the youth need to be empowered. And when we say youth in this country, you mean 45 and below. And so when we say how, what is your specific plan or specific steps that the youth can use to actually take power?
The youth empowerment involves a whole bunch of things, ranging from a quality education, the type of education that does not depend on just mathematics and English alone. From science, engineering, technology, and mathematics. Those are the STEM area where the government needs to put more effort. Giving the people the type of education that corresponds with what people are called upon to do in the 21st century. We of the Google generation are coming up at a time when the world has technology. And so the government can take advantage of technology to create a whole lot of things. For instance, we talked about the Bitcoin and the NSAS. As much as it is used to finance a civil disobedience or kind of protest, it can also be harnessed into becoming a viable element of the economy, something that gives people something to do. If I were in the government, I wouldn't just shut it down. I'll give it a critical look on how it can empower youths and make them self-reliant. Then there is the skill acquisition side, where people need to learn a skill that they can survive outside the school and the classroom, because the school doesn't teach you how to make money. You learn it out there.
All right, so recently it's not been a hidden fact that there have been clamorings for people to leave the country, certain segments to leave the country. And of course, for those who don't know, Nigeria is essentially made up of different kingdoms and empires that were put together into one nation. And so Nigeria is a nation made up of nations, which is why there's so many people, and which is why Nigeria to an extent has a lot of power, because Nigeria is several countries in one. Now recently there have been calls for people to leave the union for various reasons. So what are your thoughts on people who are calling to leave, and what can we do to ensure that we maintain a state where everybody feels included, so we can build a proper state that can compete internationally with other states?
Oh, thank you very much for this question. I think it's a timely one. First and foremost, Nigeria came to be in 1914 as a result of the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorate. The British people who did this did so for a specific reasons of their own. Of course, once we're together, we are in a marriage. And if someone in a marriage feels dominated or alienated or sidelined or being marginalized, the tendency to want to resist that domination is eminent. Now, for instance, we have the Biafra movement. More recently, we have the Oduduwa coming from the Yoruba nation. Of course, I don't have anything against their move for self-actualization. But one thing is also certain. We are not certain about what happens when a country breaks away, because we've seen countries like South Sudan. They've had independence from the real Sudan, from the northern Sudan, but they're still in crisis decades after. And so the kind of caliber of people who are going to lead the movement will determine the success or otherwise of it. But I have nothing against them, and I think Nigerian state should work for everybody. The reason for this, I think, is injustice. And if we can have justice where everyone is treated equally, whatever formula of power sharing or resource allocation that we have must be fair and just for everyone. Because in the absence of justice, you have anarchy. It should be about justice and not just us.
So Aliyu, me personally, I believe corruption, of course, is a system structure. And corruption is systematic. It's people who engage in thought, speech, or action towards a certain goal to enrich themselves or harm their enemies. So corruption is a system. Therefore, it has to be stopped at a systematic level. Now, when it comes to corruption, what are your thoughts on stopping corruption in Africa, and particularly Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much for that question. When the government of President Muhammadu Buhari came on board, he came on board with three agendas. And one is fighting corruption, the other economy, and then the security. Talking about corruption, of course, the government is doing its best, arresting people who have looted the treasury. You can imagine a situation whereby money that is meant for the procurement of arms to engage the war on Boko Haram, according to the president, he says, and I quote, that people sit in a table like they were going to have lunch or dinner, they share the money and put it in their account. Well, that's one step of fighting corruption. But another level is the institutional framework. What do I mean by that? We have to strengthen the institutions to be able to regulate people. Right now, what we have powerful people and less powerful institutions. Now, to stop that corruption, we have to look at what makes people take bribes, what makes people engage in the act of corruption. Most of the time, like I said, it has to do with self-relevance, quest for relevance, and everybody wants to be important, everybody wants to be rich. But we have to stop what makes the tendency for people to become corrupt. For instance, you don't want a policeman to collect bribe, but you send him to an outpost where he has to use his money to buy his own uniform, to buy his, to fuel the car and all of that. I've been privileged to work for the US government, and you will never lack anything in terms of the resources required to do your work. And so when this happens and you see people retiring into misery, if you go around, you will see civil servants who have served the nation, either in the military or public service, but at the end of the day, they are retired and they are wretched. Now, the fear of that kind of poverty makes people to get it by all means, making money by all means necessary in order to escape that poverty. And so we have to tackle corruption from the point where the situation that makes people to develop that tendency is being addressed. I'm not saying the government is not doing enough, but more needs to be done.
So Aliyu, a lot of people have talked, and you come from the part of the country, you come from the northern part of the country. How do you see insecurity? And how would you say is the best way to stop it? And what do you believe is the cause of it?
Well, we still have to go back to the idea of quest for relevance. People want to escape poverty, people want to be important. As a result of that, when the means available for people to actualize their goals becomes very slim, then the chances for people to develop alternative, no matter how ugly it might be, becomes eminent. And that is the nature of, that is in human nature. The state of nature says in the beginning, life was solitary, nasty, poor, brutish, and short. Owing to the belligerence of living in permanent isolation, people relinquish their right to the government, in whose repository and trustee in this modern day becomes the government to take care of everyone. So security is the number one priority of government, to protect people's lives and property. We have a challenge, we have a situation where the system is becoming overwhelmed with the kidnappings, the terrorism in the northeast, the banditry in the northwest. Down south, you have the Niger Delta militants, and you have the IPOB, you have all kinds of groups coming out. Now, the state, the tribe, has always been the original enemy of the state. So when the state fails, people take refuge in tribe and smaller groups. And in so doing, they try to provide for themselves no matter what. If you talk to the people who are talking about amnesty and amnesty for criminals, for kidnappers, for bandits, the headers, and all of those people, they talked about the condition that led the people to it. But other people argue that virtually every ethnic group is marginalized in one way or the other, and most of them have not resorted to armed struggle. So it is not a justifiable thing that people resort into banditry and criminality because of lack of opportunities. At the same time, the government have to make these opportunities available, but negotiating with terrorists and criminals, in my own opinion, isn't the right thing to do. Because if you start rewarding criminals because you can't catch them, then you call them to the table for negotiation and you give them amnesty, you're telling other people who have been law-abiding to also take on crime, that you will give them amnesty eventually. So people go around, kill people, and then surrender, and then they get amnesty. We're not helping matters. We have to be decisive in the way we do this. That is something we have to figure out how to go about, but it's a short thing, we have to figure it out.
So Aliyu, a lot of people have talked about the upcoming presidential elections, and they've thrown around a lot of names, but most of these names are 65 plus, in some cases almost 70 plus. In regards to age, however, 80% of Nigeria's demographic is under the age of 45, which is what most would consider the youth in this particular nation. So being that 85% of the nation isn't necessarily being accounted for in regards to representation, what are your thoughts on the presidential election and how can the youths get involved?
Well, 2023 is just around the corner, and of course, President Buhari has signed the Not Too Young to Run Act, which allows It amended the Constitution to allow young people from the age of, I don't know the specific age, but it allows much younger people to run for office, something that wasn't available before. So I think it's a step in the right direction. But one thing the young people have to do is that nobody is going to give you power on a platter of gold. You have to get up, you have to get involved, and we have to become more responsible. The youth of nowadays have some credibility crisis that makes them less trustworthy for power. We've seen a couple of young people who have emerged from young people to become senators, governors, but people don't see that they've done a whole lot. So the young people will have to get involved. And how to get involved in politics start from the local level. You got to get involved from your ward level to the local government level, to the state level, and to the national level. So the young people cannot just be given power on a platter of gold. Just like we talk about women empowerment in politics, it's the same thing with youth empowerment in politics. But they have to get involved and they have to become more responsible.
So essentially, they have to get involved and have to take power.
Yes, they have to get involved because politics is local. And so you got to start it locally. From one small assignment to the other, you do it well, you're given a bigger job, and that's how you build the credentials that makes you well known and popular among the people. You can't rig elections where you're not popular.
Rage on that beat, going crazy.
This concludes our broadcast of Up Close and Center. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell notification icon so that you'll be among the first to know every time new content becomes available. I've been your host, Ebube Okoli. Thank you for your time and your commitment to the continent.